Glenn, we can see you in deep contemplation there. Here goes. Right, we're underway again, and Melanie, if you could just come online, and Glenn, if you could turn your camera off. Thank you. Right, David.
Thank you. Just checking that you can hear me okay, Melanie, and yes, thank you. Okay. The way we're going to handle this is that there are a number of clarifications of evidence that we want to ascertain, but we'll do that secondly. We really want to look at step back a little bit and look at the respective positions of Waka Kotahi and Welhom. And I thought I'd start by just outlining what I understand those positions to be as a starting point. So the position of Welhom, and forgive me, these are very broad matters. I'm not a traffic engineer or a transportation planner. Hopefully I've got them correct, but I will check in with both parties at the end of this brief description. The position of Welhom, as I understand it, is that the intersection of Cashmere Oaks Drive and State Highway 2 currently is performing satisfactorily. In terms of the development, that the future performance of that intersection can be assessed at the time of resource consent, whether that's subdivision, land use, and the engineering design process associated with it. And that by that time, a decision would be made on the speed environment or speed limit, posted speed limit in the area. And that the consent process would be able to focus on the need for other interventions and that the process for doing that, based on Mr. Lewandowski's evidence, is that the controlled activity status through the matters of control would, in his view, be the appropriate vehicle for undertaking that assessment. That's our collective understanding of the position of Welhom. I've probably oversimplified it, but is there any particular aspect that I've missed or wrongly categorised?
And I think it is helpful to simplify it in the way that we have. In terms of the intersection being assessed at the time of resource consent, the initial view on that that I have is that I've undertaken an initial analysis and so on around that. It's satisfied me that the existing intersection can continue to the future with the development.
Sorry, Megan, might need you to turn your emails off again.
I'm sorry, it's unfortunately it's Teams this time, and you're using Teams to talk to everybody.
I think we can.
We'll just pause for a moment. Yes.
Hopefully that fixes it.
Just remember, it's a very broad categorisation of the position.
Yes, and I'm comfortable that the intersection can be further assessed at resource consent time in view of the analysis and assessment I've undertaken for the application, which satisfies me that there is a solution available.
Okay, thank you. Melanie, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, nothing further than thank you.
Thank you.
Could I add one item? And this comes back to the mitigation that you've suggested, Melanie, that there's clearly some things that would improve things immediately in terms of some works around the intersection that could be sort of agreed and signed off at this stage. Is that Is that fair?
Potentially, yes.
I'd certainly like to explore that further once we go a little bit deeper.
I'd call them generally minor safety improvements, however you'd like to
Yes.
categorise them. You have put those forward in your evidence.
Yes, we have, and would support those.
Sorry, David.
No, that's okay. Just for the record, I think you captured those in your last paragraph on your summary statement, Ms.
Yes.
Mears, at paragraph 3.28.
Yes.
Okay, again, at a very broad level for the benefit of the Waka Kotahi people online, and this is very simplified, but my understanding, or Planner's understanding, is that intervention is required prior to the development occurring, and that's regardless of any speed reduction that might occur between a decision and any resource consent if that decision on the plan change was to approve it. That the nature of the intervention has a preference for a roundabout, but that based on Mr. Connolly's evidence, he acknowledges that there could be other interventions considered, but we're just unsure what they might be, whether they are we're assuming that they are more than the matters identified in Ms. Mewson's paragraph 3.28. And that from a planning point of view, the type of intervention that needs to occur at the plan change, if it is to be approved, is by way of a structure plan mechanism that might involve some staging in association with nominated pre-development conditions associated with physical intervention, such as a roundabout. And that, again, from a planning perspective, the activity status to align with that sort of approach should not be controlled activity. It should involve some form of higher activity status, such as discretionary, where there's an ability to decline the application. So, Mr. Ahmed and Mr. Connolly, do you want to just confirm whether I've got that characterisation correctly, or whether you want to add to it in any way?
Thank you, Commissioner. Perhaps I'll go first. From a planning perspective, that is broadly around about right. The only thing I would like to add is with the activity status of any future potential resource consent, the importance of being able to be, my client being able to be involved as an affected party is very important, which the controlled activity status does not provide for participation in the process.
Yes, thank you. That's an important point. I've noted that. Mr. Connolly, was there anything that you would want to that you would disagree with in that broad categorisation, or you'd want to add to?
It's just in regard to the way the roundabout and intersecting treatment is viewed. And from my point of view, it's important to have safe speeds and safe access for all users. That's not necessarily a roundabout or the speed limit that's associated with that, although all the speed limit and the infrastructure needs to be integrated in that fashion. So I think you made a comment about regardless of the speed limit, I think it's all interwoven, but as long as there's safe access for all users is my main concern.
Yes, I guess what I was trying to indicate there is that I understood the Waka Kotahi position to be that speed reduction on its own was not sufficient intervention.
It goes hand in hand with the infrastructure as well. So yes, as I will present it as I've suggested my evidence, that can't necessarily be separated.
Glenn, just be ready for a yes, no on that question when we get to you.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a clarification query actually to both commissioners, if I may. When you mentioned speed reduction, what speed reduction is being discussed? Is it the safe and appropriate speed, or is it another speed? Just so we know what you're getting at.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that,
Okay.
Ms. Armand. I guess what I want to explore later on is what the time frame and the likely decision that might come out of the ISMP, sorry, and also the potential for dealing with the area to the south of Cashmere Drive, where there might be a discrepancy between what the speed limit that comes out of the ISMP and the current 50 kilometre an hour position. So not really in the habit of answering questions.
I know, I beg your pardon, I was just seeking clarification. May it be helpful if I find out from Waka Kotahi regarding those speed limit reviews, and
Yes.
may I present some more information that might be helpful in understanding the actual process and the very heavy statutory nature under which they are undertaken, those speed limit reviews.
Yes, I guess if, to the extent that that helps, there's the dimensions that are, or the areas that I'm interested in is the 150 metre distance between the current 50 posted speed limit and Cashmere Drive.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the 600 metre north of Cashmere Drive. And I understand that's where the Welhom have suggested that the 50k limit should go. 50k or 50k, I think. And then there's the area to the north of that, north of what we might call Avida Corner. So the other three particular areas that the panel was interested in terms of potential speed alterations.
Thank you. I think that we can present information that will be helpful in understanding those sections of the road.
Yes. Okay, thank you for those, and thanks for the indulgences there. So therefore, on that basis, I'm going to now turn to some of the big picture questions from Mr. Georgeson and Ms. Mewson. And they're going to be focused around the question of if and when intervention is required. Whether it's at this plan change stage, or whether it's at the resource consent stage. And I want to start with understanding the factors that affect the performance of the intersection. And Mr. George, I guess I'm asking questions to both witnesses, Mr. Chair. I really want to understand the relative importance of the physical component of the intersection, the geometry as it exists, and the changes in traffic movements that are projected to occur, and understand the relative importance of those two factors in affecting the performance of the intersection. Can we start with the physical geometry of the intersection, and can you just outline what are the key attributes there that lead you to the conclusions that it's performing safely currently and will continue to perform safely with the interventions outlined in the last paragraph of Ms. Mewson, if necessary?
At a broad level, there's two features associated with the intersection. There's the physical elements of it and then the user elements.
Yes, it's probably a better way of categorising my question. Yes.
The physical elements are that it's a priority T intersection, currently with a give-way sign on the Cashmere Oaks approach to the highway.
What does the priority codicil refer to?
So priority, the way I use it, is that priority is afforded to through traffic on the highway,
Okay,
and that the side road traffic is the minor road, and that traffic yields to the priority traffic on the highway.
thank you. That's useful.
The intersection exists in a 100km/h posted speed limit environment, but the actual operating speeds on the highway through that location are substantially less, between 75 and 80 km/h. Not surprisingly, given the position of the intersection just beyond the 50, 100.
Just on that, and one of the notes I made on your evidence in chief is that that's not always the case where the environmental speed is lower than the posted speed, is it? I'm not talking in this locality, but in sections of the state highway. Are there situations where the environmental speed can often exceed the posted speed?
Yes, there are those instances.
Yeah. I'm not asking you to condemn yourself
No.
as a speeder.
But I think a good example of what's actually happening in practice from a safety perspective nationally, and this is the point that Mr. Mewison was making, is that safety crashes and risks are reducing, and that's why there are particular factors to reduce them. So what has historically been seen in past decades, if you like, from a safety perspective and higher operating speeds and things like that, is in my view suppressed now. But take your point that there are locations where operating speeds are higher
Yes.
than posted speed
Yes.
limits, but that not being the case.
Thank you. My understanding of the environmental speeds that you've presented using the different percentiles is that there's lower environmental speeds on the approach from the south, and the speeds from the going north from Cashmere Oaks Drive are slightly higher in terms of environmental speeds. Firstly, is that a correct categorisation? Broadly?
Broadly, yes. Drivers are accelerating out of the 50k urban
Yes.
area as they go northwards past the intersection.
Yes.
Coming into Masterton, they're decelerating and braking as they approach the threshold.
Yes. So they're in that 150 metre distance between the posted 50 and the T intersection. They're speeding up, in layman's terms, accelerating, and as they go past the site, assuming they're not exiting it, they're getting close to the posted speed.
I think my view also is that that change happens at the bend to the north. Drivers are approaching from the north. They come to an 85km/h advisory corner, so they slow down to that corner.
Yes.
And as they pass through there, they get the feel that they're in a slightly different area.
Yeah.
And that's why these speeds remain kind of reduced through to Cashmere Oaks and then reduced more once they get to the urban areas.
Yes. You just answered my next question, so thank you for that. So that's the. Is there anything that you would want to, Ms. Murchison, would want to add in terms of the what I call the physical factors? I think you call them physical also, as opposed to the user element.
No, I've got nothing further to add on that.
So moving to the user element, what the panel is really interested in here is what it is about the development and the nature of the development that could give rise to issues associated with the performance of the intersection. Is it solely the increased volumes that would come from the retirement village and any residential development associated with that? Or is it the nature of the drivers associated with the development, or is it some combination of both?
Maybe starting with the facts as we know them. The intersection currently operates with a predominance of right turn out movements and left turn in movements. Not surprisingly, given the majority of traffic is heading to and from Masterton Township. I expect that those proportions remain very similar into the future with further development in the area. So continuing on the developments of the right turn out, left turn in movements. In assessing the capacity and performance nature of the intersection, taking account of existing traffic plus traffic generated by the
Yes.
unbuilt portion of Cashmere post subdivision, plus the development of the plan change site. I conclude that the priority intersection can continue to operate well. It's not getting to all levels of service that by themselves trigger a need for a formal change in the form of the intersection.
Yes. Got a question in relation to that in terms of the level of service, and I'll come to that in a minute. But can you just remind me, in terms of your analysis, I believe, well, your assessment of traffic generation hasn't focused solely on the split between retirement village and residential. I understand you've also looked at, from a traffic modelling perspective, if the entirety of the plan change site was used for residential purposes. Is that correct?
Correct. So
yes.
Two scenarios analysed: a full residential scenario with
yes.
traffic generated by 250
yes.
lots, and a second scenario, which is a combination of retirement village and the balance of the land.
Yes.
As standard.
Yes, with I think the figure there was 99 residential. I just can't recall, and the retirement number one.
There's various numbers there in terms of numbers of villas and numbers of care suites and so on. The specifics of that is set out in the
yep.
ITA.
Okay. I don't think I need that specific, but just knowing that there were two scenarios and.
Correct.
So what this comes down.
And maybe just to explain the difference between those scenarios is that the full residential scenario has a dominance of traffic movements in the AM and peak of the commuters heading to work, work-bound or school-bound trips. Whereas the generation of a retirement village is a lot more suppressed during the.
Yes.
So there's a scale of difference between, particularly the morning peak, between the two scenarios.
Yes. Is there any difference between the right turn out and the left turn in between those two scenarios? You talked about predominance of right turn out and left turn in.
In the, most of the work-bound trips in the morning would be right turn out, and those trips would then become left turn in.
Yes, in the evening.
As being the homebound trips.
Yes. What about the afternoon predominance for the retirement village? Again, similar?
What I'm looking to point you to is the, I may not need to refer to it directly now, but section 7, 7.1 and 7.2 of the ITA that was submitted with the application
yes.
sets out the specifics of the traffic generation predictions for scenario 1 and scenario 2. It gives those quantum of differences between those two scenarios and separately the AM peak, the PM peak in a period around the middle of the day.
Yes. Thank you for that reference. the issue then that the panel is focusing on is the question of gap selection and how that might change from what currently operates and what might operate with increased traffic under the proposal. I'm interested in both yours and Ms. Muirson's, I guess, key assessment of that.
There's a lot of published research that's been informed by a lot of on-the-ground surveys about gap selection and how drivers choose and select gaps in different environments. Those are the base numbers that are used in the software program I've applied SIDRA to make those predictions about how the intersection might operate. There's two parts to gap selection. There's the critical gap, which is effectively being the minimum gap driver would choose to make for example, a right turn out of Cashmere Oaks.
Yes.
Then there's something called headway or a follow-up gap.
Yes.
For example, if there's two cars waiting at the stop line to exit out onto the state highway, and there is a bigger gap, the second driver in that queue might also choose to enter that same gap, but wouldn't need the same critical gap length that the first driver would.
Yes.
And you've probably experienced that yourself, where you followed a car exiting out of a side road somewhere and be able to identify that there's still a remaining gap that you can enter into.
Yes. Is the gap acceptance more critical for the right turn out as opposed to the right turn in? Presumably there'll be more vehicles taking the right turn out than vehicles right turn in.
So that comes back to the 80-20 proportions.
Okay.
The difference in those two movements are that the right turn in vehicle is looking for a gap only about traffic stream, whereas the right turn out vehicle is a gap both ways.
Yes. And your position in terms of the availability of critical gap and headway follow-up gap under the proposed traffic volumes associated with the development on a full residential scenario is what?
The intersection can continue to perform with good levels of service and smaller delays that does not warrant a change in the form of the intersection to something more severe.
Use the term level of service. I've come across that in other forums when it talks about the level of service at a section of a highway or might be functioning at, and understand classification uses an A to F or A to E classification. Is that sort of classification appropriate to gap acceptance matters?
Yeah, at an intersection, the level of service is informed by delay. So you're correct that the bands of levels of service range from A to F, and there are bands of delay that relate relate to each of those levels of service.
Okay. Are you able to tell us what the band of delay for the existing intersection is? Yeah, you no doubt you have in your evidence.
I know that delay that has been there. I would need to come back to you if you're interested in the grouping of bands of delays that relate to levels of service.
Yes, definitely interested. For both the existing intersection and I guess the two scenarios in terms of the proposed development.
Yeah, so the specifics are set out in section 8 of the ITA.
Okay.
And what I have included there are snips or images of the results tables that are produced out of the SIDRA model.
Mm-hmm.
They describe levels of service in those tables as well as delays.
Yes. Is there any particular page or subsection of section 8 that you'd refer us to?
So I've referred in my summary statement, I think, to figure 8.8, which is a table that presents the SIDRA results for the AMP period for the higher traffic generation scenario of table 1.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, of scenario 1.
Scenario 1. Yeah. Thank you.
Just checking that I did actually refer to figure 8.8 in my summary statement.
Written it down. Do I need to change it?
It's just that's the connection there between what I've just mentioned, being the relevant figures showing those outputs.
Okay. 2.1 of your summary statement.
Correct.
Yes. Got it.
So that figure shows that the right turnout move operating at a level of service C with an average delay of 15 seconds. Now, if it's of interest, there's a band obviously of delay that relates to level of service C. I'm not sure what the upper end of that band is, but I can come back to those if they're useful.
Could you do that?
So that's referring to scenario 1 of the proposed proposal. Yes. Do you have a similar level of service and average delay for scenario 2?
In my evidence and sheet, at paragraph 7.5, substantially the same reference I included.
Yes.
2.1 of my summary statement, but 7.5
Okay. Yes.
of my primary statement, that's where I list out for the busier morning peak, because that's when the main right turnout movement occurs, and the difference between each of the scenarios that have been assessed there, the existing scenario, the future-based scenario, which is existing plus consented cashmere oaks, and then the two future scenarios of full residential and a combination of retirement village and residential balance.
Yes, no, it's 7.5, got that. So, Mr. Georgeson, that's really your evidential basis for saying no major intervention at this point. That's what it comes down to, really. Right turnouts under either scenario 1 or 2, and whether they are acceptable or not in terms of level of service categorisations. In terms of the, and this is where Ms. Mewson might want to come in terms of the types of matters that she indicates might be appropriate in terms of interventions, and her paragraph, I think, was 3.8. Yeah, 3.28, sorry, which is additional intersection warning signage, vegetation trimming, lighting upgrades, etc. How would they impact on, if at all, the level of service and the average delays associated with right turning vehicles out of the development under either scenario 1 or 2? Would they have any meaningful, either of you, would they have any meaningful impact on those matters?
My understanding, not on the level of delay for vehicles leaving Cashmere Oaks Drive.
Yes, because
there might be, with a giveaway, the change in the giveaway to a stop, then the vehicles are legally binding, they have to stop. So therefore that might create 1 or 2 seconds extra, but depending on the, I suppose, the level of activity on State Highway 2.
yes.
But
presumably your answer is based on the fact that the real reason for the level of delay has a strong correlation with the number of vehicles making that manoeuvre, as opposed to the form of the intersection. One of the questions I was going to put to yourself and to Mr. Connolly was there a role for techniques such as acceleration and deceleration lanes to as an intervention at a level lower than a roundabout? And I probably answered the question myself based on what Mr. Georgeson said, and that those acceleration and deceleration lanes wouldn't have any measurable material impact on the right turn out manoeuvre. Is that, have I oversimplified that, or is that a fair conclusion?
yes, that's a fair conclusion. Yes.
Yes. Presumably.
An acceleration or deceleration bay may provide a waiting area for a vehicle to cross and then manoeuvre into the through traffic. It gives them a refuge, and there is a short one there at the intersection, but I understand people don't use it like that.
There is a short one, and it's, if you like, it's the right hand part of the lane that would take on the function as an acceleration lane, presumably. You're not suggesting that they would make a mover over to the right to the left and then accelerate.
No.
Is there any ability to extend that current, let's call it an acceleration lane, to the south of the southbound traffic? Is there physical width within the road formation to do that?
Well, I suppose with the drop on the eastern side, that does make it slightly difficult, but there is some width on the western side, but that might involve realigning the whole state highway with the centre line.
Yes.
So
What's the current feeling in the transportation industry on the role of acceleration and deceleration lanes The reason I asked that is I did attend a quarry hearing last year where Waka Kotahi were a submitter, and the particular witness said there was a move in the industry away from those sort of interventions. Is that, would you subscribe to that view or have a different view?
I really can't say, not from what I have seen personally, but that may be happening elsewhere on other projects I'm unaware of.
Okay.
Maybe just a follow-up view from me on that is that the context and the environment here is very, very important, and that there's a balance to be struck between the kind of improvements we're talking about and the speed environment. And the appropriate time to be doing that is through the resource consent process, when we know more about the speed environment and what changes and interventions the Transport Agency may have made at that stage. But I'm particularly conscious about the likes of acceleration and deceleration modes and how they might be read in conjunction with changing speed limit 50 to 100k area, which is just immediately around that.
Yes.
So that's why I'm saying that there is a balance to be struck here somewhere on what those interventions are, and the best way to progress those through is when there's a knowledge about the highway environment.
Yes. That's, unless there's anything further you want to add, Ms. Mewson, that takes me on to that very matter of what the resource consent might look at in the event that this plan change is approved. Just trying to find the legal submissions. What have I done? Here we go. And I'm working off the attachment to legal submissions from Welhom, and I'm looking at controlled activity rule 5.53. Do you have that in front of you? Good. Ms. Mewson, do you have that?
Sorry, but I'll find it.
Yes. What Mr. Lewandowski explained is that this is an existing rule that's been modified. Sorry, it's a new rule. Sorry, it's a new rule, but has been modelled on a similar rule for the other retirement village, which is a controlled activity, and so it refers to Appendix 16 being the site, and the matters over which control are reserved as a controlled activity include bulk and location, urban design, 3 waters, and then we landscaping, screening, signage, etc. And we come to Roman numeral 4, which is road safety and the provision of access and parking spaces. And post the notification of the plan change and in his evidence, Mr. Lewandowski has suggested that Roman numeral 4 would benefit from some more specificity, and he's listed 5 matters that would provide that level of detail, and the first 2, A and B, seem to relate squarely to the intersection, improvements and alterations to existing roads, and safety improvements to the intersection of State Highway 2 and the Cashmere Oaks Drive. Mr. Georgeson, I know that you've appeared on a number of resource consent applications in different forums. Does that sort of matter of control enable you to undertake your ITA, which is a requirement in the information requirements, and recommend improvements to deal with that matter of control?
So just thinking about the ITA first, there is a published national guideline about
yes.
ITAs, 100-page document that sets out the framework for preparing ITAs. that usually starts with determining a scope and often doing that in conjunction with the road controlling authorities as to what needs to be assessed and taken forward. There are 3 or 4 different categories of ITA, from effectively simple to complex,
Yes.
depending on the scale of development, the environment, and so on, as to whether the assessment needs to be undertaken simply just for the immediate area, or it needs to consider a whole region and moderate scales in between that. So those ITA guidelines are a framework that I would refer to in terms of setting the context of what needs to be assessed or through the resource consent process.
Mhm.
Those assessments will include updated matters of being assessed in the ITA for the plan change already, so that will bring in new information about the speed environment, if that's changed, changes with traffic volumes, changes in development forms from those that I've assessed to date. Now, those changes in development forms might take on something quite new. For example, might have aspects of shared travel and group travel and things like that compared to independent car use and so on. But I guess I'm just reflecting there that travel habits are continuing to change, and they will need to be brought to consideration of a future resource consent as
Yes.
well. And then that would lead to matters that are in the renewal for their as to the types of improvements that would be required to manage and mitigate effects.
Yes. Okay. Amendment 6 to the provisions is something that Mr. Lewandowski has commented on, and there was a suggested addition from Ms. Barr, Roman numeral 3. I don't know if you've got that in front of you. It's in the blue text.
Melanie, you've got this as well, I take?
Yes.
You found this?
Yes, it's unfortunately the page number, it's not numbered, but it's Amendment 6, and blue text is down the bottom of the page, and it's shown as struck out.
Yes.
And it starts off: the first resource consent application, either subdivision or land use for a retirement village, shall include a structure plan to be added as to Appendix 16. That includes infrastructure interventions at the intersection of Cashmere Oaks Drive and State Highway 2, and then it talks about some other matters. Mr. Georgeson, and I'm drawing on your experience here as a traffic engineer that's involved in resource consenting. How would that differ from the requirements that are in 553 Roman numeral 4 A and B, in your view?
In my view, the level of extent of improvements and mitigations which might be identified as necessary will arise through the assessment process and through the ITA, and then, in my view, can be properly captured as recommendations being taken forward and conditions of consent. In the same context of the matters there included in E4.
Yes. So is there, in your view, some complementarity between the struck out text, that clause A, and what 553(4) requires or allows the council to assess? Presumably, the intention was with Amendment 6 that that would require the information to be provided when considering a controlled activity, and then to help inform the council's matters of control at Roman numerals 4A and B. I think, well, I'll put this question to Ms. Barr, but I think that was the intention based on her evidence that the two were working complementarily.
Perhaps my view is that that's the kind of information that would be captured within the ITA.
Yes.
Anyway, in the kind of prescriptive nature of industry requirements for ITAs.
Yes. Does it hurt to specify it in the plan so that it's clear to all resource users?
I just wonder on this point. So Mr. Lewandowski, when he was going to speak, maybe just after lunch, was going to take you through our suggested further tweaks to that information requirement.
Okay.
Would there be benefit in writing that now so that Mr. Georgeson can comment on it, because it does expand on the detail required under the ITA to reflect and complement the matters
Okay.
of control, and so just raising it as a possibility.
Yes.
Like
well,
that.
I guess Mr. Lewandowski is relying on Mr. Georgeson's view on this in terms of the necessity. I was just taking at face value his strikeout. I haven't had a chance to read his circulated summary that came through last evening.
I think just for the flow, let's carry on.
Certainly.
And I think if we need to refer back to Mark or Melanie when we're talking to on that particular changes, Mitch, we can do it that way. I think David's on a bit of a roll here. We don't want to interrupt.
Well, I'm nearly at the end because I'm now at the so what question. What should, and it's a question I put to a lot of witnesses, what changes to the provisions need to be made to meet the appropriateness test in section 32. No, clearly that is a planning question, but informed by writing advice. So what's in front of us at the moment is a controlled activity that sets out with some degree of specifics what the council's matters of control are over, and a possible information direction as to what controlled use activities should include in terms of information requirements. And I'm just simply putting to you that might it be of some use for the plan to indicate what the expectation is when a controlled activity application is lodged, rather than just saying an integrated transport assessment.
So we can circle back on those ones.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's probably as far as I need to take that. Clearly, I want to put the same questions to other Waka Kotahi experts, particularly Mr. Conley and Ms. Sanamand, particularly on activity status.
Yes, Mr. Landon Lane too.
Oh, yes, Mr. Landon Lane, yes. Maybe I'll take a breather and see if I've missed anything, Stephen.
We've got three supplementaries, let's call them those. Look, that was an excellent discussion. Thanks, David, for leading that, and the witnesses for certainly participating in that. My first question is, when we talk about the scenarios, the residential total, so that's scenario scenario 1, the whole residential. Yep. Scenario 2 is the village plus some residential. Do you think, from an assessment point of view, it's appropriate for us decision makers to take scenario 1 as the appropriate case to assess, because the plan provisions set that up as a possibility?
The traffic outcomes which emerge from both of those, I don't arrive at different conclusions in terms of effects or the responses that might be needed to mitigate those effects. So I guess my response to you is more around that we don't end up with a different conclusion for each of the two scenarios.
I don't think you've answered the question. In terms of assessment of this proposal, scenario 1 is perfectly achievable as a controlled activity. Is that the worst case we should be assessing as decision makers?
It's the worst case from a transport.
Yes, but that's a feasible case, isn't it? For assessment.
It is a feasible case.
Yes, and a entirely feasible case, because that's on the face of the plan change, an outcome that can be achieved.
Correct, it is that, it'll be obvious that, Welhom has brought the plan change and so on, so the likelihood of that might have a different weighting, but you're right that that provides for a feasible scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that, do you want? Sorry. I'd worked on the assumption that scenario 1 might result in a different activity status to a scenario 2. And I just wondered whether I can get a quick response on that from Mr. Lewandowski. I worked on the assumption that scenario 1, which is full residential, might result in a different activity status from scenario 2, which was the mixture of retirement village and residential based on Appendix 16.
So a pure residential subdivision, like is on the council's advice of discretionary activity.
Yes.
I will a bit later on talk you through that, but also the permutation that even if it is a controlled activity, that there are sufficient matters of control to still address these matters that you about to start on taking through that.
Yes.
Not sure if I've answered the question.
No, you haven't. I understood from your evidence on day 1 that scenario 2 could qualify as a controlled activity. The mixture of it, if it met the performance standards.
The retirement village component, yes.
Yes.
The balanced residential subdivision is
Would,
discretionary.
okay. So scenario 2 is a mixture of controlled and discretionary, depending on what's put in front of the council.
Correct.
Whereas scenario 1 wouldn't enjoy controlled activity status at all.
On the advice of the council, that's correct.
Okay.
But we can target express a view around that.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
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 Okay.
So the point for an assessor, so you're an evaluative witness, both you and Melanie, whether it's controlled or discretionary, that we should be looking at the effects associated with both scenario 1 and scenario 2. With from a out of bound point of view, a discretionary activity is still feasible.
Both of them are valid scenarios.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Look, my second question. And look, following on from that, you were going to say, well, they're very similar anyway. I do want to perhaps have a little look at firstly your evidence that you took us to, that table which showed the different gaps.
That might be paragraph 7.5 of my evidence.
Okay.
Where I
yes.
bullet point or list those out, if that's the one.
Yes, that is the one I'm thinking about. Just go to 7.5. All right, so that's the one. So you've got these 4 scenarios. So the existing scenario is, as we have it now, future base is what's permitted already in Kashmir. So we're looking at the, so 12 seconds per vehicle gap. If you go to your scenario 2, there's only a 1 second difference in there, isn't there? So that's a very small small change.
Indicating to me is that the intersection continues to perform well. There's more traffic than we're coming out of the intersection, but because the side road volumes are still relatively modest, and because there is a different frequency of gaps in the highway traffic, that it's still very easy
Okay, so this put some numbers around to base your overall conclusion around. So 12 to 13 seconds, pretty small number. One second difference.
Yeah, and not to make the point earlier that it's not an exact science,
No,
modelling,
yes.
but the numbers indicate sufficiently to me
Yes.
that it's of the low order.
Yes.
And continues to be
Low order change. Yes. So that's why I asked you previously about the confidence in your modelling. So, but with scenario 1, the full residential, whether it's controlled or discretionary, it's feasible. That's got a 4-second difference between the base and the scenario 1 output in terms of your modelled delay time at the intersection. That's right.
And, yeah, if it's 2, if it's 3, if it's 5 seconds,
Yes.
variability,
Yes.
it's the same conclusion.
Same conclusion follows. I'm not trying to trap you or anything.
No. I guess what I'm saying is we're still thinking of it, and I'll come back to you about these level of service bands.
Yes.
But given that there's a range within these
Yes.
bands, and
Yes.
I'm not quite sure what they are, but
Yes.
we're still operating within that level of service C band.
Okay. Yep.
With a range of the
Okay. So if you could translate your 7.5 A, B, C, D to the level of service bands, see where those fit. Come back to us. It's a simple little table, maybe. That would be great. So look, that was my first question. The second one is, I would like the council team, so Harriet and Megan, to, and I think you probably would have written down David's broad positions of the parties as we're taking it in. Is there any commentary either of you have about where the position of the parties pre any further offerings from the applicant or the proposer? Are they generally how you understand the positions as well, or is there any differences?
It was certainly, yeah, an accurate and broad summary of my understanding of the positions of both parties.
Yes. Harriet, was there anything that you thought about? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, no, I was just checking because I made some. I noted down. I'm just checking that I haven't got any scribbles. So no, I haven't.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's certainly a great technique that David went through, and the way that we're checking back with the planning and the traffic experts as we go, so we understand we've got it about right is good. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to come at this stage. All right. I did have one other.
Yeah, you said one other.
1, 2, 3 down. Probably. I've got some other specific questions, but I'm just following on from where you were, David. No, I must have.
I've got one additional that I'd like to put to both Ms. Georgeson and Ms. Mearson, and that's the same question I'd like to put to the Waka Kotahi experts when they present too. And it goes along the following lines: is there any situation in respect to the development of the retirement village solely that might not be able to be dealt with as a condition on a controlled activity? Now it's quite a simple question, and there might be some sort of nuanced answers to that, and I think Council for Welhom and Mr. Lewandowski touched on that earlier, in the sense that the council might place conditions that are not agreed to by the applicant, in which then invokes a section 357 objection and appeal rights following that. But that's not the answer I'm looking for. The answer is, whether the controlled activity matters of control framework exclude any ability to place conditions on a controlled activity to deal with intervention. So yeah, something for all parties to think about. Whether Welhom want to answer that now.
Nothing comes to mind to me immediately from a transport perspective. That would necessitate or warrant anything different from being considered for the two scenarios today.
Ms. Pearson?
I probably cannot answer that question self, so lack of experience in that space.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have found my third question. It was nice move, David. It was amongst the Amendment 6 that's in the provisions as we have them currently, and it was a discussion about the integrated transportation assessment. When you were talking about the 100-page document that forms the methodology for that, you mentioned that that's done in conjunction with the road controlling authorities. So does the methodology require a author of an integrated transport assessment to liaise and consult with the road controlling authorities in preparing that?
So they have guidelines, documents, and there's a direction within the guidelines to suggest that the scope of an ITA should be discussed and developed in collaboration with road control authorities.
Okay.
It's not a mandatory requirement, but it's certainly that indication that it's good practice, and certainly that's my practice as well, so that we do end up with an assessment that is or deals with the matters that are of interest to the road controllers.
Okay, so it's good practice. You do it as a matter of course in your own practice?
Yes, I do. Yes. I would say it hasn't always been universally, but depending on the scale of the development and things like that.
But if you're dealing with a state highway T intersection, is there any scenario you could think that you wouldn't have some dialogue with the road controlling authority?
Can't think of any examples where I haven't.
Yes, okay. Melanie, do you prepare these documents as well from time to time?
From time to time, yes.
And would you, as a matter of good practice, be liaising, getting information from road controlling authorities?
Yes, I would.
Yes. So if we changed the information requirement in Amendment 6, an integrated transportation assessment in consultation with the road controlling authorities, that would just reflect normal practice. Okay. Thank you. Look, I do have another couple of minor, not minor, other questions that are outside of David's flow of his questions. So I'll go to those now. Just at the start of, we've heard about the fact that the posted speed's 100, we're down at 85 percentile around the 80 to 85-ish. Does it follow that if you had a posted speed of 80 kilometres, your actual speed will be somewhere less than that in this environment, and the same with 50? Is that, it's a crystal ball, but...
Look, I've been thinking about that too, and my view is that that will have an influence on drivers and the speeds at which they travel through that intersection. I believe that they will reduce from what they currently are. And that's one of the reasons I'm suggesting that it's useful to revisit the assessments, the analysis and responses and so on at resource consent stage, because there is changes
in the wind.
Changes planned.
Okay. Is that your understanding too, Melanie?
Yes, it is. Yes, from my experience, that's what I found too.
Okay, that's really good. I'm looking at the question of roundabout at one end of the spectrum to perhaps the menu of, I'll turn them minor safety improvements, for the want of a better word, that you're suggesting, Melanie. Is there anything in between that jumps out at you?
Well, I suppose traffic signals is what you would have in between.
So would that be actually in between? Would that be the less costly? But I presume, I don't know. We had a figure of 5 or 6 million for a roundabout. Traffic signals are less costly.
Oh, sorry, Mark, you go.
I expect they would be. The challenge in this location, and particularly with the roundabout, is they're pretty land hungry. And the challenge here is that there's a big drop off on the other side of the road. And I would expect that in order to introduce a roundabout in that location, it does get pretty tricky from an engineering perspective. And I would tend to agree with the costs that Mr. Smale put forward as to what's involved there. And that's one of the reasons why they would be of that sort of order. Traffic signals wouldn't be quite as land demanding in that location, but I would suggest that they would be out of context.
Yes.
Yeah. And what could Katani have a view on that as well?
Yes.
But that would be my view.
Yes, and further south, when we're in the 50k, it's priority intersections with giveaways, I think.
I don't think it's a signalised intersection.
No.
I don't think they want their first one to be here.
Trying to think of someone who was proudly talking about some town, their first traffic signals, might have been Taupo or something, which again is different context. So look, that's really good. I did have one other question for you specifically, Mark. It's around the buses. These bus routes, the council, we talk about the council in 2.5 of your summary. You're talking about the Greater Wellington Regional Council, I presume?
So the regional council is the entity that's responsible for scheduling buses, for determining new and extended routes and so on.
Yes.
The local council is then responsible for the asset or the infrastructure to support
the bus or the road in terms of infrastructure.
In terms of stops and
okay.
Where and how they turn around and things like that.
So the Regional Land Transport Committee, are they involved in those sort of bus routes and what happens, or is that just done on a local level?
But it'll be so it's local level determined first in terms of routes and services and extensions to those or not and so on, and whether there's enough growing demand to support a review of existing services. Then I expect that gets taken up to the regional committee for approval. Yeah,
but if you've got maybe 5 years' time, 500 households being serviced in that part of Masterton, there's a bus that comes part way to northern Masterton, they'd be thinking about, well, do we extend that bus route further on? That's the sort of thing that these councils do with public transport?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility that with some more people living and particularly perhaps being bus users, the bus might go an extra K and do a bit of a loop.
And there's routine reviews of that. There's a bit of a change too now towards on-demand services as well. So the way in which services are provided, there's different options being presented. A recent on-demand service, just as an example, is in Tawa, in Wellington, where they've introduced small, almost minivan type buses.
Yes.
And they're effectively on a dial-up app.
Like an Uber van. Yeah. Certainly they're trialling that in Hawke's Bay as well, in Hastings and Napier. So no, that's good. We are hearing from Greater Wellington, but are they talking to us about public transport issues or?
They didn't raise public transport issues in the level of specificity that we've just been discussing in terms of routes and scheduling and services, but they did raise connectivity as a larger issue and provision of multimodal transport.
We can ask about that. So that looks like David might have a question.
I do just apologies. It's a question from Ms. Mewson. Ms. Mewson, I just wanted to ask you very briefly about the safe system treatment philosophy. And I appreciate that the ITA talks about that philosophy, but just from your perspective, I just wanted to understand whether it's regarded as best industry practice.
Yes, it is. It is. It is a toolkit of interventions, primary and supporting interventions that we look at as engineers when we're looking at an intersection or a corridor.
Yes. And in response to the question to the chair earlier about whether there might be some interventions in between the spectrum of safety improvements and a roundabout, you postured that traffic signals could be considered. I just wanted to understand whether that sort of tool in the toolkit fits more into the safety transformation concept as opposed to the safety management approach in terms of the safe system treatment philosophy.
Well, the signals have their inherent issues. They change the type of crashes that you may have at an intersection more to rear end rather than crossing turning crashes. So it's how you apply that, and with other measures such as speed reductions and maybe raised platforms to mitigate the change in the environment. But the signalised intersections sit more in the supporting treatment category rather than a primary treatment. So it's it's a step up, I suppose, from the priority team.
Yes. So does the safe system treatment philosophy differentiate another level somewhere between safety management approaches and safety transformation approaches?
No, they're probably the two approaches that you have. Yes.
Now, the reason I asked that question is I'm very keen for the planners, Mr. Lewandowski, Ms. Barr and Ms. Sanamid, to give their views as to how activity status under the RMA might align with the safety management approach and the safety transformation approach as set out in the safe system treatment philosophy. It may be that they don't, but if you think that, simply tell us. But if you think there is some correlation between those sort of interventions, on one hand, low-level management versus a more active intervention at the other hand, we'd be very keen to hear the response to that. Not now, but at the appropriate time. And Mr. Lewandowski, that might be when you present, Ms. Sanamid, when you present, and Ms. Barr at your time slot.
Thank you.
It's a very philosophical type question, but I'm very interested in it, particularly along the lines of what the philosophy behind controlled activity status is and what signal it's sending to resource users compared to, say, discretionary activity status, and what the expectation around those activities might be, and whether there's any alignment with that safe system treatment philosophy.
Okay, is that clear enough? All right, so I do have one final question targeted mainly at you, Melanie, and I'll be interested in any other comments from Mark, but I want to take you to your page 7 of your summary, and it's table 2. And it's looking at DSI, and thank you very much for taking us through the explanation of this, Melanie. It's very, very helpful to us. But you've ended up with some numbers in the table. Is for assessment purposes, when we're thinking about how we should assess the effects and make decisions on activity status and everything else, whether we decide the application, is the right-hand column of table 2 the one we should be focusing on?
Yes, with the additional development.
Yes.
And I have, as I stated, I have modelled it with the scenario 1 volumes. Yes. So yes. That's probably more conservative.
Yes, and that's great. And that's why I was asking the questions about scenario 1 and scenario 2. So the right-hand column, table 2, we're looking at these DSI numbers in, it's a ratio, is it a ratio or a point? I'm not a stats person, so you tell me through. Yeah.
It's not a ratio, it's basically a number, so it's 0.85, so.
Okay. And could the range go up to 100, or is it always under 1?
No, right, it can be, I mean, on my table 1, it was over 1.
Yes, okay.
So it depends on the equations we've used, Wakuko-Tahi equations, and they do take into account volumes and whether there has been existing crash history, and that's multiplying it by national averages. So it's a little bit more difficult to sort of unpick it.
It's not like a percentage, is it, where you can look at?
No.
Okay. So what would be a high number if you had a really poorly performed piece of road in the DSI? Would you be seeing 2s, 3s, 4s, or from your experience?
Yes, I think if this puts this under the medium and low risk, depending on the personal and collective risk that I had discussed previously. But in terms of a high number, I can't. I probably can't categorically say, but it would be definitely maybe a 3 or a 4.
Okay, that's all we were looking for. It's an order of comparison. So Mark,
maybe just to add to that,
yes.
There is a little bit of detail in the next paragraph of
yes, 3.22.
3.24
yeah.
at the top of the page.
Oh yes, yes.
In which she compares the general description of high
risk. Yes.
Now, that is actually described in a 5-year scenario period.
Yes.
So that talks about 3 DSIs
yes.
in 5 years, which so just looping back to
that's
the previous table.
Yes.
Now, that relates to a number that predicts number of crashes over a period. So that's 0.85 crashes every 20 years.
Yes. Okay.
So if we convert 3.24 to the same,
yes.
in the description of high risk, we get 12.
Yes.
4 times 3 is 12.
Yes.
So it's that magnitude of comparison.
Yes.
I would suggest between the 0.85
okay.
and 12.
Melanie, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, so high would be that 4/3, which would be 12, a number of 12. Correct. And we're in the low to medium, which is less than 1. Okay, no, I think that's really exactly what I was looking for. And just to follow on, you say in 3.2, there's a difference of 0.3, I think, between the T intersection and the roundabout scenario at the 80 to 100 kilometres an hour. That's the
Yes.
change, and that, in your view, still in the low to medium range.
Yes. Yes.
And between, if we had a priority T and you're 50 to 60 Ks, the difference is 0.1 between those two. So we're talking about small numbers comparatively, aren't we?
Yes, yes. And I think it's really the change between the table 1 and the column 2 and column 3. That's the difference.
Yes. Okay.
Because column 2, that 0.51, that's what will happen if nothing happens at that intersection other than underlying growth.
Yes, yes. Okay, no, I understand all that too. So I'm looking at that far hand right column as the one we should be thinking about as a comparison between base case and scenario 1 at the two different speed levels. David's got another question here.
Just sorry.
Maybe I was just going to add to that. Bearing in mind that they are predictions. Well,
yes.
I think you're right that the indicator you can take out of this is that there's a scale of difference between what's predicted here versus what would be regarded as high risk.
Yes.
But bearing in mind that the context of the location doesn't suggest that there is a poor safety record. And also it's the context of predictions versus actual location, which is important as well, that this view is set out in.
Yes. David?
Yes, just a very small point or question from me, Ms. Mewson, is there any benefit in distinguishing in rows 1 and 3 on table 2 between 80 Ks and 100 Ks, or is that just splitting hairs?
Oh, between the priority T and the roundabout?
Yes.
Yes.
For those two speed limits.
Speeds. Does 80 to 100, if it was 80 or 100?
Would there be material differences in the figures?
No, so it's as we've said, it's a blunt instrument. So we are looking at the equations cover anything over 80 km/h speed limit. So 80 and 100 are grouped together, and 50 and 60 are grouped together.
So the tool doesn't allow that to be done.
Okay.
It talks about higher speed locations and lower speed
Okay.
locations, and that's the definition.
Great, thanks for the explanation. Right, that's all I have for you both. And we have, David,
no more.
Thank you for your assistance. It's been, as always, a great learning experience for us when we get experts taking us through. I do have one final comment, and it's a heads up for you, Glenn. It's really about Melanie's paragraph 3.7, and where she's basically saying she doesn't agree with your analysis that the road environment is rural. She thinks it's peri-urban. I'm not sure whether you've driven that road recently with the Avida connection. I really want to test you on that quite strongly, and whether you want to whether you've driven that road yourself since the Avida's been there, and whether you still stand by the fact that it's a rural traffic environment. But we'll ask you that when we come to your evidence. Just a heads up. Thank you. I'm looking at the 1240.
So I wondered, we do have some brief legal submissions covering those few points that were raised yesterday, attaching some documents, and whether that would be useful to go through before lunch, as far as the useful use of that time. In your hands, though, have to do that otherwise after lunch.
Apart from that, is it just not just, but is it Mr. Lewandowski then?
It was also the infrastructure experts just on their joint witness statement was the other minor point.
Well, shall we do that first? The joint witness statement first,
Sure, we can do that.
and then we'll have a break because it's been a reasonably big morning. And then we'll come back and start after lunch with your legal submissions.
Okay.
Thank you. And that means the supposedly the engineers can get on their bikes and head back where they're going. Yes.
So I've got a short joint witness statement. There is an attachment that is separately being printed and provided, but I'm sure we can get that provided on screen. I think the content of the statement itself is the critical aspect.
Can you bring a copy of Mr. Wondowski's statement? You said you were going to print it out.
Yes, I've got council with one there, so.
Okay.
I think the best thing is we'll just take a couple of minutes to read this and then come back with any questions or clarifications. So yes, that's very clear. There is a attachment which will be
Correct. So the attachment, the soft copy has been provided.
Okay, we'll get that after.
We can have that brought up on screen. It's being printed at the moment.
Okay.
And it'll be with you shortly.
No. So I don't have any questions of the civil engineers, and neither does David. So thank you for doing that. For us, it's a very efficient way of coming to a conclusion. And as I say, you're welcome to stay or go or whatever's.
If I can get a flight, it's hard to get to South Island.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, and great work for doing that for us. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Well, we'll take a break. 1:30 we'll return. Thank you. Just wait here.
And I'm here to go. Okay.